What does an expediter do?
Well, Expediter is a terminology that I think is a bit antiquated because historically that was always almost a form of courier service where you were taking plans from architects, engineers, different consultants, and basically understanding the process of who things need to go to at the city to theoretically expedite, speed up the process.
Hmm.
It's really become more than that based on complexities of code. So it's the front end where you're really doing the big percentage of your expediting work of figuring out the code determinations, helping the engineers, architects, and overall project team understand what it's going to take to get a project approved and eventually with permits through whichever city and jurisdiction you're going through. So that's what an expediter does. It's the intention of having a more rapid process to
Hmm.
get through the bureaucratic maze to obtain your building permits.
I think that's interesting because most folks, I mean, obviously, expediter has the term expeditious within
Right.
it, and most folks assume, okay, if I hire an expediter for my project, they're going to work their magic, their secret sauce, and somehow cut down the permitting process time by half or by whatever percentage they think it might be. But so like, are you guys, I mean, I know you make the process smoother and more efficient, but are there things you do to actually cut down how quickly things get approved, or is it more about planning accordingly?
So there's always been the saying, there's two things you can't avoid, death and taxes. There's really a third though, and it's going through the entire permitting process.
Okay.
And there isn't a shortcut to any of it because there's no, magic uh, potion that you can take to just push something through the city. It's all about putting in the front end work so that when it does go to the city, everything is organized, prepared so that the people that are working on it have the best ability to execute their part of the job, which is to follow those rules and regulations that are in place. So as long as you know all of the different things that come into it, then that's the way you can speed up the process, is really through the experience of understanding where all of these items go to.
I see. So we should ask also, can you give us a background about your office and what you guys do, how long you've been around?
Well, we're coming up to our 10th year of Crest Real Estate, which
Hmm.
is really exciting for us. And it's amazing that it's flown by in such rapid pace. And the way that it all started was actually when I was going to UCLA, so locally, born, raised, I think I'll always be in Los Angeles. Um, I was going to go to law school. So I had a political science background educationally at UCLA and always figured, having some sense of understanding rules and regulations would do well professionally in life. So with that, I was, taking classes, preparing to go to law school. Then I realized that, I've also always had a affinity for construction. Since I was a little kid, my parents talked to me about how I'd always want to go to the local construction sites and see what was happening. And also a sense of interest and intrigue in high level design.
Mm.
So I took a shot at working with a real estate firm during my second summer after school. And it turned out this connection became, a very important piece of my life where the mentor that I was able to get, his name is Gary Morris, became a real mentor for me. And he was a construction project manager, but really just a overall leader in the industry
Mm.
of figuring out how to get projects approved and also how to strategize and structure them. However, his wife was who I consider kind of the original queen of expediting. Her name is Penny Flynn, and really a wonderful, remarkable person that had the personality to, and still does. She's still doing the expediting, to want people to work with her at the city, but also with a foundational knowledge of the code.
Hmm.
And so taking those two things together and working with them and really realizing that, wow, there's an industry out there that takes the law and then the ability to turn it into three-dimensional architecture where you're actually seeing these interpretations come to reality, in a couple of years once construction's done. It's just something that I immediately fell in love with. And it was really by chance Gary and Penny happened to be my neighbors growing up. And so this interview, my father came in and because I was interested in getting into real estate that second year after working for a law firm after the first year as an intern, my dad said that Gary was looking for someone to help during the summer. And so I went over, had my interview in his garage, and which was his office one of his offices at the time. And we just hit it off. The first day I get in the driver's seat of his car, he says, "You drive." And so he sat next to me, and we're coming out from Calabasas, going to downtown, going to Beverly Hills. And I'll never forget my first meeting with him. We drive to a place called Century City. Well, of course, we all know Century City now, and I live right around there. But I didn't understand that this place existed. And so I remember going into this huge high rise in the Twin Towers and sitting in on this meeting, and I'm 20 years old at the time, and sitting with all of these brilliant, very established men that are sitting around strategizing. And there were also some women in the room as well, strategizing the development of something called Tower Park, which eventually became called The Mountain, which is the $1 billion property that's been for sale, 162 acres in the middle of Beverly Hills. So I just kind of fell into working on these really incredible projects and had the interest in law and architecture to blend these things together. So it's just a series of years and experience sitting, I guess, even though I was driving, in the passenger seat with Gary and Penny, to really understand the industry and get a head start, so that when I left college, I was already working on a whole number of projects in the very elite high end within the LA area, had my real estate license, was doing some things with Gary there, and just continued to build on a local LA real estate career.
That's a crazy story. That's a wonderful story. I think it's really fascinating on a number of levels. And one of them, as you started to point out, is this merging between code and law, and like on one hand, let's say, but then the three-dimensional and design aspects of architecture and building. And we, of course, as architects, come from it generally from the other direction, from the direction of the design and the massing and the sculpture of it first. And of course, we also know that we have to deal with the code. And for most architects, it's a real headache to do that. And so I think it's interesting that we have this role of the expediter, who's kind of serving as the bridge between the two sides almost. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is exactly what it is. The reason it's so complex and why it seems as though we've created this real niche market for ourselves is that the code is not a one size fits all, especially when you're talking about, what we set our foundation on for the company. Even though we do, many commercial and high rise projects now, the foundation was always these very complicated hillside residential projects in the hills of LA. And you can't really write a code that fits all of these different properties, because every single one of them, even neighbors next door to one another, there's not one property that's the same size, the same topography, the same orientation. So trying to take all of these different codes and place it on every independent property is very confusing. And so the only way I feel that we've been able to effectuate making this a better process is just through experience and data collection, right? I think that it's something that's just over the years and decades to accumulate all of these different variables that can occur. And so what we're really trying to do, and what we, focus our initial part of the project services on, is we want to create the three-dimensional canvas for the architect to paint within the lines.
So I think the first point you made about the code is not easily adapted to every site is interesting, because I think for the layperson, they're thinking, well, the building code is the building code and the zoning code is the zoning code. Isn't the building code the same throughout the entire city? So how is it that so I guess there's a number of questions that come with that. One is like, could you explain the complexity of the building code for people? Because I think for some folks, it seems maybe simpler than it is. And they would also wonder, isn't it the same everywhere throughout the city? So why do I need someone to do this interpretation for me? Can't my architect do that for me?
Sure. Well, I mean, it starts with the zoning of your property, right? So let's take LA and Beverly Hills combined. There's the R1, the RE11, the RE15, 20, and 40. Then there's agricultural zone land, which you can still build a house on. There's the hillside zone in Beverly Hills. Then there becomes these jurisdictional areas like the Beverly Highlands Homeowners Association, which is, what people more normally can refer to as the bird streets. There's the Mulholland Design Review Board, which has its own rules and regulations. There's, a whole number of different layers to multiple codes that are enacted on each property. Then you also have to dig in on the title report for each property to make sure there's not a covenant that was created back in the 1920s between a property owner and their neighbor, or a small homeowner association that somebody that bought a property has no idea even existed. So it's just the differences and the nuances between each property just blocks away from each other can be quite dramatic. And, then you also have to take into account, is there protected trees? Is there, a water course? What are the different potential obstacles to putting what the client desires for their property?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I feel like also the codes and regulations have become more and more complex over the last number of decades. That's for sure the case. So, which brings me to the next question. Are there certain projects where a client would definitely want to use an expediter, and are there certain projects where they can get by without one? Like does it have to do with complexity?
I think there's a couple things that would come into that decision for someone. So the first one I would say is the complexity of the property, right? If you have something that is in a zone that requires a lot of research and determinations on what can and cannot be done with the site, I think that having the expediter, or what I like to consider as land use consultant, on board is pretty much a necessity, because the amount of expense that you're going to utilize with your architect and engineer, and also the carry cost on these properties, which is extremely burdensome to many people, you need to not design it twice. It needs to be right the first time, and you need to have the working relationship with someone that can guide you in that right direction. So if you have a complex site, I think that it's a definitive requirement, and most architects, especially the ones we work with, they require it from their clients to have that input and work with us or someone similar. I would say that if someone didn't have a time crunch and it was a very simple project, maybe interior only remodel, I think that you could get away without utilizing Expediter. However, some architects are still going to want that person to be involved. So it's just going to come down to budget and the desire to, make sure that someone is there to be a peer reviewer. I mean, that's really, in a sense, what we're providing is reviewing what's going into the plans prior to taking that leap of going through the full submittal process.
Right.
So when is the ideal time to have an expediter on board? Is it like when maybe even a client is looking to purchase a property, like having someone look at the obstacle and the constraint of the site before pulling the trigger is important? Or is it you already have the architect and you're about to design, let's just have an expediter look at it before we start?
So that is when the most value is added to the project. And when we're typically called in, because, now people know about our firm, and it's kind of a part of a due diligence process, similar to getting your geotech and survey done on a property. You're also going to hire Crest to come in and do what we've coined the terminology of a PDA, a property development analysis. And so that analysis is going to, at the front end, tell you what your allowances and restrictions are on a property. And that way, when you acquire the site, you now have basically a customized code for your specific property. And so many times people are buying a property and they don't have an architect selected. So what they'll do is they'll take this development analysis that we do, and now each architect that they want to go interview is on a even ground with the other architects, because most of them in town are very familiar with our reports and how to analyze them. So if you acquire a property and you want to interview 3 different architects, you can send this report along with your geotech and survey. And then when you go meet with these architects, they each have an understanding on a same consistent basis of what can be done with the property. And that way they can give you their an accurate vision comparatively with the others. So that's one reason to do it. The second at the front end is, there can be positives and negatives, right? Sometimes you could determine that a property will offer you more than you anticipated. And then there's other times when our development analysis will come up with findings that make someone realize that acquiring this property is not something they want to do because of certain restrictions or nuances to the project that they weren't aware of. Yeah. Whether something be potentially historical or some other restriction that they were not aware of. So we're also now seeing at the front end, people that are selling their properties are hiring us to put this analysis together, because now, just like when an architect is able to go and review it the same way with 3 different architects, now when a seller is selling their property, they can provide our report and analysis to all of the different buyers. Right. And that'll eliminate this due diligence timeline and the potential for contingencies to continue being extended because of the buyer now having the information rather than the seller. And with all transactional situations, it's all about who has the leverage, who has more information. And so if you have the information at the front end and you know what your property can do, you know what type of people are able to acquire it, and that they can't really kind of pull you around during this contingency period.
Right. That's a really great point, because I think it's also highlighting the intersection between these 2 roles, and also the third one being real estate, right? And what's fascinating to us is that when you go see a house and there's a realtor there that's selling the house, they make all these claims about what you can do. And of course, for the average person, they don't know any better. So like, oh, wow, I could build a 2nd story, no problem. It could be done in a year. And as we're architects, we're very skeptical sometimes when these real estate agents make these claims. So I can see where having a legitimate report up front would be a huge benefit, well, for everybody, really, but also for buyers and the sellers. I mean, because we've heard some really insane claims, and we feel bad actually for those who don't know. Like, this is not actually as easy as you think it's going to be. Yeah,
and also, I mean, I think on the seller side too, like if the site has a huge development potential that's not being used at the moment, you can add a tremendous amount of value to the property by telling your buyer, hey, if you buy it, guess what? You can have like a complete basement level built out, and you could add this much more square footage to the property, therefore, that much more value. I think it's a very smart move to do that.
I've actually really never understood why people selling an asset, and especially these days, we're talking about things that are in the many multiples of millions of dollars in value, and to obtain a report that actually gives you an assessment of how to truly value your property, especially if it's something for development. I mean, you can't mathematically just take a number and place it on a property without knowing what can be done there. You have to kind of work backwards. Yeah. So it's always fascinating that, historically, we've always just had people put a number on a property because they just picked it out of the air. And, so sometimes our clients that are utilizing it as a buyer, they find out, oh, wow, we've got a great deal here because the seller was not aware of these things. Mm-hmm. And then conversely, if a seller thinks their property's of a certain value, and then we do the report and they realize that there's more value there, well, I mean, they've just, made a windfall through that. So, there's actually a lot of real estate agents in town that have this vision now of really pitching more than just the property to their clients, and saying, especially on the selling end, they're going to their clients and saying, you should really do this report. It'll give me the ammunition to sell this property. And actually, we have a number of partnerships with many different agents out there where we're helping them with these reports so that they can go and get listings, because they're now adding value instead of just marketing something. Whereas for a house that's completed, it really is about the marketing of a completed asset, right? But when you're talking about what a huge component of the real estate market is, which is selling infill developments, right? Where there's an old home that's ready to be torn down, or, remember, even though I focus on the residential, we're also doing this for commercial multifamily projects. We're writing up reports where there's the transit-oriented community bonuses and showing people what can be done with commercial properties as well. So having the power lies within the knowledge, right? And so the person that has more understanding of the property is the person with the upside. So if I'm the owner of a property, I would certainly want to have more of an understanding of my personal asset than somebody coming in to acquire it, which is, what happens depending on which person does the research.
Is this becoming a more of a trend or more of a thing to do now? Because maybe previously the code was not as complicated. Maybe previously people didn't want to spend the money on an expediter, and now they're seeing the value. Like, I get the impression that this is becoming much more the thing to do, whether it be through your office or maybe even others.
I think that, I really do think that our office and the way we've approached real estate and the way to add value to property has changed the dynamic of how people look at land assets, because now they're realizing there is something out there that can be done for a low cost, respectively of the overall value of a property, that defines what the value of that property actually is. So I think that it's probably because now we've done it on so many hundreds of properties that it just, the thought of it is now out there. Whereas before, I don't think people considered it. And, once someone realizes that there's a win-win situation where they're getting more information and they're adding value potentially, and the third win of, making sure that your asset's valued and the contingencies don't run if you're a seller, or as a buyer that you're actually acquiring what you think you're getting. I think that it's just something that's now spread through the community in a very positive way, so that people want to have this understanding of knowledge and really what can be done, so that they're, we're talking about large numbers here. And so to have a backup to why something is valued or being purchased at a certain number is very important.
Yeah, and for some perspective for listeners, because they might not know the kind of homes you're talking about and the property values, can you give us an idea of like the average property value of the homes that you guys are hired for?
Yeah, just like there's not a one size fits all for the code, it certainly can go the same for properties. So in terms of land value, and again, it's just the commercial and multifamily is more difficult to pin specific numbers to, but the house ranges for land value to build a single family dwelling, you're typically seeing that somewhere between the $3.5 million and as high as $70 million for a piece of land to build an estate or just standard single family dwelling.
Yeah. And I think that's important for people to know, because they might be thinking, like a $600,000 property. No, we're talking about a different tier in a certain sense, especially in Los Angeles.
Well, when you look at the hillside zone, which is where it's the most important, I think, because there's so many variables, just the way the market's gone in the last couple of years and demand for a very limited amount of real estate has pushed even the entry value of lots, north of $2 and $3 million. And then of course the real premier estates, you're seeing a lot of transactions for land in the $20 to $35 million range for the really elite properties. And then there's some that have sold for even more. But in the flats and in the more rectilinear flat properties, it is still important to do an analysis where you can, acquire land for potentially under $1 million. But it's still, there are less variables that come into place.
Right. So a few minutes ago, you were talking about that there's kind of two key aspects to what you guys do or where you've gotten, which is experience, having done this a lot, and then also data, that you guys are data driven. Obviously, you have to pull a lot of data. So what are some of the places or sources from where you pull data from to inform these reports?
Well, so it's amazing. We've done over 3,000 projects.
Oh, wow.
And it could be more than that at this point. But last time I was checking. So there's just, and the thing is, we also keep a great retention of our staff. And I think that's one of the other foundations of our company. My partner is my brother, who is also, been doing this since his sophomore year at UCLA, where he came and worked with me. And then, best friend who's an attorney is our general manager. His wife is our CFO, and on and on. We've basically created a culture here where people stay within the company. And because of that, you're gaining so much more experience over a decade of being here and seeing all these different variables that we've now created a team that's not just myself or my brother, but a pretty extensive sized group of people that now have this understanding of these different codes. And we keep a database in the company that talks about the different clearances and checklists that you have to go through on any property in any one particular zone. So our Beverly Hills team has one set of checklist items. Our City of LA team has one set of checklist items. If you're in Mulholland Design Review Board corridor, you have another set of checklists. If you're in Malibu, again, different list that we continue to add to, because even though we've done thousands of projects, every week we are learning something new. And that creates a lot of fires to put out. But it is really the nature of the business that you're always going to see a new variable. And that's what I think keeps it very exciting and keeps us focused on not letting our attention to detail down. Is there is something new on almost every project that you've not seen before. And so it makes it very difficult, but it also keeps that, real focused attention to each of these properties. And so it is really through the accumulated data between our, the employees and talent here, and then also these databases that we create.
Mm-hmm. So how big is your office, or how many employees?
There's 25 people in the field, and then we have admin staff and some others that consult with us.
I would imagine you guys are able to undertake a lot of different projects, a high quantity of projects with that amount of people.
We are. There's always a need for more. So if you are aware of people with the skill sets necessary, we are consistently hiring and looking for new people to come on and be a part of the team. So anyone out there that's interested in both law and architecture, we're interested in you. So it's actually fascinating. That kind of leads into who are the ideal people that do this work. And most of our staff is actually an architecture background or engineering background, and a couple with masters in urban planning. So having the architectural skill set to read and review plans, but not want to be focused on designing details in an office, has translated very well for us to have people that get the more big picture scope of architecture, because we're really in there with we're fortunate. We get to work with some of the most talented architects in the world. And I think that architects are the most creative yet logical people that exist in our society, because they are artists that are working within a boundary of engineering and rules and regulations. So you have this incredible, creative skill set that's also utilizing this very utilitarian and engineering philosophy to create their masterpieces. So by working with some of these incredible talents from all over the world, and for properties that have, pretty remarkable budgets to create grand architecture, our staff, I think, really enjoys many of the projects that they get to work on. And I think that's why a lot of architects have really desired to come and be a part of our team.
That's a great summary of what architects do. I like it.
I assume too that having trained architects within your team helps kind of put in 3D those regulations that you read, right? Because it's something to understand what the words mean, but it's something else to put it in 3D and actually understand what that means in terms of physicality, right?
You're so right, Marina. And it's creative, right? So when we do these PDAs, property development analysis, right, we are providing this kind of very thick booklet of what your rules and regulations and guidelines are for your project. And that's dry and you do need to read it. But typically when we present it, the clients and the architect immediately flip to the completion of it, which is the 3D images, right? So we have people on our team that are creating these 3D models that are creating these different envelopes and setback studies and kind of layering of the building. And so you're basically taking this entire written package. And as I say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. And so that's really what you're getting by creating these boundaries in this, as I said, 3-dimensional canvas for the architect to paint within the lines. And then we're also, because I'm very passionate about architecture and layout as well, we're actually kind of coming up with a very schematic site planning so that if it's not to an architect, the report, and it's to a buyer or a seller or being put out there into the market, people are seeing some type of vision of what this could be. We keep it quite conceptual because, we want the architects to come in and do their creativity, but there is a certain checklist and philosophy that I think has been shown to be the most effective, especially when considering residential projects, of the flow through a property and how it really should be developed.
So you had described the PDA and its benefits and advantages and the value of it for sellers. For people who have a current home, though.
Are you referring to them wanting to rebuild their existing
Yeah,
home
let's say
property?
they want to do either a ground up or they want to do an extensive remodel or something like that.
Yeah, so it serves the same purpose, right? You're now coming in and explaining to people what can and cannot be done on their property and kind of the best form of process to get through the system, right? Because there could be multiple tracks of things to go through. Right. And this is, what people want to see so that they can go and understand what can be done with their property. So you're right. It's really anybody that owns a property or is interested in a property should really have this site-specific guideline. And I was trying to think of analogies on it, and it's almost like one's personal health, right? All of us have different criteria that makes us feel the most healthy and things that you're deficient in, things that you need to work on. And so having the same sort of very personal approach of medicine for your property, of really understanding what it needs to be its optimal version of itself, is what we're trying to provide.
Yeah, I like that. And it actually reminds me that one of the analogies that we use all the time is people are considering hiring an architect. They want to know, what service do we provide? Like, what do architects do? And a lot of times we find clients will ask us to come in on day one, and after like a 10-second meeting, sketch me up a floor plan, give me something. And while we can do that, and sometimes it's helpful, we also think, well, there needs to be some kind of analysis here, right? Whether it be a more analysis that's more based on the code and the regulations like you're describing, or even analysis of the clients and who they are as people. Like we can't just throw out random stuff. We could, but if it's a custom home that you're going to be living in for the next 50 years, I kind of want to avoid that. We need information.
It's very personal.
Yeah.
And you need the information from, what you just said. It resonates so well. There's so many layers to architecture, and you're trying to find out the internal personality of your client, right? To serve them from a, that personal, the soul level. But then there's also the functionality and the rules and regulations from the more technical perspective, right? And so the architect's job is to bring all of these things together to create something that's timeless, efficient, and something that at the end of the day, both you and your client are really proud of.
So for these property development analysis reports, do you require that the geotechnical survey soils report is done at the same time, and the site survey? Do you have to have them as a prerequisite, or how does that work?
No, look, again, the more data, the better, but it's not always necessary. There's so much available data online these days to be able to identify what can be done within some sort of percentage of accuracy.
Right.
Gotcha. Going back to kind of the process, can you take us step by step, from like when you start doing the PDA until maybe the building permit or the project is done, so we can really understand what Crest is doing along the way throughout that building process?
Right. So we focused so much of our conversation thus far on the front end of the project. And, it's interesting thinking about our last bit of conversation here about how much is focused on that front end, because it sets the stage for the success of the project all the way through. So coming in and first and foremost, getting that information and really understanding what it's going to take to go through the process, what your allowances and regulations are, that is all of that foundation for the success, right? So I guess it's if you made it a John Wooden pyramid, the base, the foundation really is the understanding of what all of the rules and regulations and processes you'll have to go through to then get to your pinnacle, which is a completed home. So following our initial assessment, which we do in tandem with the architect, the engineers, and the homeowner, and possibly even meeting with the city, we now have a baseline for what the project is trying to achieve. From that point forward, the architect, engineers, project manager, they're really coming in together to assemble this package of plans that is going to then be sent to our office for a review. And so we basically have phase one, figuring out the plan of action, then phase two being reviewing everything that comes together prior to taking that final step and approach to the city process. And so we're then reviewing the plans in a team meeting with everyone, identifying, items that need to be updated and revised, comes back. And then we're now now is the big day when we're submitting to the city. So everything is packaged up together. Our team, sometimes in an architect is joining us, but typically it's our team taking the full set of plans with all of the technical details, taking it to the city, submitting it into the process, paying the fees, and then being in that plan check queue. Additionally, there's some projects, and really most projects these days are going through multiple tracks, where you have the standardized plan check process, which is going through building and safety in the planning department. And then also there's potentially a discretionary action, which means there's a voting body, whether it be a planning commission, a building and safety board of commissioners, a design review board that's also reviewing the project. So we're now going on this tandem track where we're trying to get multiple approvals at the same time, so that at the end we're all coming together. So now we're in the process, and we're now patiently waiting. We are hoping and that our upfront due diligence and upfront coordination with our team has served the purposes of being effective, so that when the plans do come back to us, because there is a review process timeline and there really is nothing you can do to expedite that other than hopefully the plan checker knowing that your set of plans has been reviewed ahead of time. So when it comes back out, there's always corrections. I don't think there's ever been a project that has had zero plan check corrections. Regardless of the size, there's always something, despite how much work and effort we put into it. And so then our team is going to go and we're going to distribute the task to architect, engineer, and the landscape designer of things that need to be done to then go back in for a second submittal. And then we're hopefully going through the little checklist of items. And then simultaneously, we're going through this process of the discretionary hearing, getting to hearing, reaching out to neighborhood groups, speaking to the neighbors, making sure that the project is set up for success once we get to the public hearing. And so then we are getting to the hearing, hopefully getting that approved. At the same time, hopefully getting the plans out of plan check and doing these last series of corrections and going through all the different departments. There's Public Works, Bureau of Engineering, Urban Forestry. The list goes on and on of the different departments you need to go to get this checklist of clearances done for your project. So it's it's kind of a symphony orchestra, right? Where there's all these, we're here being the conductor and really kind of playing that role of bringing the team together to everyone be playing these different instruments to create something that is at the end producing a building permit that then the hard work of the project actually starts and you build the project. So it's all of these, the background to getting permits for projects is so extensive. And I think that gets lost with people that aren't in the business of how much goes into it to be able to get to that point of having a building permit to go work on. And then, as I said, the really difficult part of the project is then that next phase of actually building.
Yeah, that's a pretty intense process. I'm glad you really went into the weeds, because it is, especially if you are looking to build a house that is custom and fairly complicated on a site that is complicated. There is a lot that goes into. Would you be able to tell us what is the approximate amount of time that your team needs to kind of like gather all the data in the preliminary phase, looking at all the codes and all of the information about the properties?
Sure. Again, look, everything is different, but I think if you just take the average, the average of assessment is going to be, 1 to 2 months, maybe sometimes 3. But then the process of putting all of those plans together to then go through phase 2, which is the plan preparation process, we typically see that as about a 4 to 6 month process, sometimes longer, depending on the details and complexity and decision making. Then you go through the building permit process, which, depending on if you have discretionary approvals required or just going straight through plan check, that's anywhere from 4 months to a year. So if you take kind of an average there of, even though an average is higher, but, let's say 6 to 8 months, you're at 2 months of planning, 6 months of, plan preparation, additional 8 months of going through the process. So you're really looking at over a year from land acquisition or identifying that you want to do a project to when you can break ground.
And I would imagine that the permitting process takes longer if the projects are bigger and more complex and you're asking for variances and other things like that.
So definitely if a project is asking for, permits are broken into 2 categories. There's by right permits and discretionary permits. So a by right permit means as long as you follow the rules and regulations that are within the building and zoning code, you get a permit through what we call the administrative process through building and safety plan check, right? And that's going to be fairly similar. Of course, a more complex project is going to take longer, but even if it's, a fairly simple, straightforward property, there's just this level of processes that you go through, and the timing of review from the city is pretty consistent regardless. Then if you're also going through the second category, which is this discretionary component, which you're now relying on a voting body to provide the approval or in some cases denial of a project, you're looking at, having to go through the city putting together a staff report of what you're requesting, and then getting to hearing, which in most cases is more than 6 months. Sometimes there's certain jurisdictional boards that takes over a year to get through that discretionary process, right? Where someone is having the discretion to say yes or no, or some modification therein of your project. So that's the two ways to go through it.
And with the latter, with the discretionary process, are you guys the ones typically presenting to that body of people, or is it the architect, or do you tag team?
So we really believe that a team cohesive effort is the most effective always. So we're trying to bring in everyone that has something to add to the overall picture of the project. So we are there to set the stage and do most of the presentation and set the strategic elements of how a project is going to be presented. But we do like to have the architect, the engineer, in cases the landscape architect, involved in that presentation. Additionally, we are collaborative with many of the law firms in town. So even though we're, serving somewhat that purpose, having a law firm involved, especially on more high profile projects, is almost a necessity to get the lawyers involved to be able to do their proper presentation and make sure that the legal grounds for a project is being handled in the accurate way.
What's interesting, the way you described how you guys do things, is that it sounds like, because we started the conversation by asking, like, what does an expediter do? And it sounds like that, for you guys, you have this goal of making sure the building gets approved by the building department and gets all the permits required as efficiently as possible. And it sounds like what you do is whatever is required to make that happen, which is bringing in different people, bringing in lawyers, bringing in landscape architects, whatever process and people are necessary to make that happen. It sounds like that's what you got. You're problem solving as you go.
Absolutely. I mean, that's really that's exactly what it is. We are trying to make sure that we create a full team to be able to play the game in the accurate and appropriate way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you don't have, I do a lot of football analogies. It's something I'm very passionate about. If you don't have the wide receivers or the running backs on the team or the linemen, you're kind of going to be missing something. So you have to assemble all of these pieces onto the board, and someone's acting as the quarterback. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's the architect, sometimes it's the owner, sometimes it's the attorney. But having everybody in place to do their job is really what is necessary to come out with the eventual victory on the field.
And then a minute ago in the process, you were saying that before all the drawings and everything gets submitted to the city, you guys will do an in-house, basically a plan check. So does the set of drawings have to get sent out to other groups for plan checks for different portions of the code, or do you guys do everything in-house? Like, you're the last kind of stop before it gets submitted?
For the most part, we are the last stop before it gets submitted. There is, because the more important thing to assess is the planning and zoning code aspect, whereas the engineering, hopefully there's a very capable, qualified engineer on the team that's addressing the project in the most appropriate way. So we have to rely quite heavily on the engineering, but from the architectural and planning perspective, we are that review process.
Gotcha.
I'm a little bit curious. What is the project that you've worked on that was the most challenging in terms of either permitting or regulation, or if you have one that just kind of is in your mind right now? Well,
probably the most difficult projects are still going on. They seem to not want to end, but every project has challenges, and I'm not just trying to say that, but there are some that have been more complicated than others. And I think that typically what we see as the most complicated projects is something where there's a new variable of something we haven't gone through before, right? Whenever you're experiencing something for the first time, it's a difficult process because not only is it probably our first time doing it, it may be the city's, very inexperienced in doing something as well. So there's a lot of concern and consideration before being able to approve a project. I think that more the things that come to mind are the projects where there's been, unique perspective taken on how to achieve something that adds to the property. Take, for example, a project in Truesdale Estates that's a beautiful home by globally renowned architect Sayota out of South Africa. And what we did is we initially reviewed the property and identified that there was some legally non-conforming components to the property. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Truesdale Estates, which is a very, very beautiful part of Beverly Hills, city of, that has extensive views over the whole city of LA. And the property was developed by Paul Truesdale to create this stacked layering where every property had its own view and it didn't really disturb the hillside so much. And so this property in particular had a big 15-foot tall retaining wall at the front end of it. And so even though we're not allowed to do anything off of the slope, what we determined was we could actually take this wall, and instead of it being a wall without view, remove it, put glass there, and now we have this entire basement level that now has views of the whole city. This is one of the properties that on our drive around we went to.
Yeah.
And is more recently famous for Drake has been staying there, according to news reports that have been coming out.
So it's public information.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what things come out in the media, and maybe it's something intentional because obviously very high profile, well respected person that's living in a beautiful property that is for sale for $65 million if you got that laying around. So that really added an extensive amount of value to that project. Mm-hmm. And it came from this, assessment of the restrictions and limitations within the code and taking those limitations and utilizing them to the benefit of the property owner.
So it's not so much about finding the loopholes in the regulation. It's much more about interpreting together and in a way that you could make things happen. I mean,
yeah, there aren't loopholes. The codes are very tight, and there's regulation, and they're very well thought out from planning departments that have been doing this for decades. Right? They've established these codes over many, many years. So it is exactly what you said. It's the interpretations of those regulations that can be of benefit. So if you have this, relentlessly positive and, creative mindset to try and achieve what makes sense and is beneficial for the property, that's the way to do it, is through an interpretation with the existing code.
That's the really interesting part about what you guys do as well, is that there's this, you mentioned positivity, and I think that's totally true, because it's very easy for everyone in these professions to look at the code with just a massive headache and with disdain. But if you have the right mindset, there's ways to look at it from a different perspective. And again, you're not cheating the code. There's not a magic loophole. There's not this magic shortcut. But if you have the right perspective, you can do it. So in the case of the Sayota project you were talking about, I guess the retaining wall still exists, but you guys basically just push it back to create a room before, when there was maybe a room, but there was no windows or no view at all.
That's exactly right. So, it's really coming at it from this. And the thing about permit processing, and everybody that's gone through a construction process has dealt with this, it's not an easy process. So you have to have that ability to immediately take a challenge and not think about, why that happened, but what is the solution? What is the next step that we can take to improve, enhance, and eventually prevail on this? And there's just too many projects happening to where we can focus on anything negative that's occurred. It's really about finding what is the solution for, because that's really all anyone wants to hear, whether it's the client, the architect, anyone. How do I fix this?
Right. And I think the interesting thing was, I think earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that clients sometimes have a vision of what they want to have happen. And then these reports and what you guys do in one sense, is to see if what they want can happen. But the flip side is that through your investigations, and I think there's certainly a level of creativity involved, you're actually figuring out new possibilities that no one else thought about before, potentially, that were not visible unless you had done this kind of savvy analysis that you guys are doing, such as turning a basement that has no windows into, I mean, we were there. It's basically, it feels like almost another main level. I mean, I don't know how much value would have added to the property because of that, but I would imagine significant to the value and significant to the experience of the home.
We want to be a add value service. And that's why people choose to continue working with our firm. They know we're coming in to not only solve problems, but come up with ways to enhance a project, right? And so, this extra value added in a certain level is really important. But, we're also now adding value by, warning of pitfalls that could occur along the construction process, just from seeing so many different projects go through and making sure that everyone's lined up with the right team. And I think that is the most important part of it. And then finding different variables. And we love showing someone, hey, did you know that this could be potentially added to your property? Because that gives a sense of us adding value and us having a role in enhancing a project. So we're always trying to seek out ways to not just give a very baseline answer, but come in with new ideas that can be utilized.
You mentioned that sometimes the city, has to deal with things or projects that they've never done before, right? And it actually reminded me of an office I used to work at in New York that designed the largest rooftop farm ever built in New York, back a few decades ago, right? And when they came up with that project, the city had no idea how to respond to it because it's never been done. There's nothing in the code, in the zoning talking about it. Have you found yourself working in similar, situations where you kind of have to present things to the city and maybe work with them to implement new codes, new regulation, new approach?
So you definitely want to know what you're going in with is going to have some chance of success, right? So we've heard some very ambitious ideas from clients of things that they would like to propose on certain properties that we have said, there's just really no chance this is going to happen. And in some cases, they'll still say, please still just go and investigate this further. And, we're always trying to think of, all right, well, how could we approach this? How could we get, this project, palatable with the city and the neighborhood groups. And so, it is important to try and push things forward. And, architecture, especially in Los Angeles, it's cutting edge. And we want to do things that are groundbreaking and find ways to achieve new allowances. I'm trying to think of, some specific ones that I can speak about. But there's certain, because, some things are confidential, but we're always interested in thinking outside the box. And again, this goes back to architects and, different entrepreneurs in this incredible city that brings so many talents together. People are going to come up with new ideas, and you want to be able to try at least and find out if there's some possibility there. I don't know if there's a great answer on that one in terms of how to exactly go through it, but, just try and approach it with logic and reason and see if there's the way you can effectuate change, like we talked about earlier, is a win-win situation. What are we able to provide and what is it able to give? So, is everybody on both sides of the table at an advantage by bringing in a new approach? I think those are the types of things that can, make something new occur, just like what you were talking about with that farm. I'm sure that when the city saw that, they said, well, we don't know what this is. We don't know how to approve it, but we do know that having farms on rooftops in New York would be a really incredible and beneficial thing for our community. So I imagine they probably worked on making something happen.
They made it happen. I think it took quite a few years, to be honest, to go through. They eventually happened, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
I was wondering how much of your, because you guys have been established for some time, and you certainly have a reputation. You've done a lot of projects. How much of your reputation matters when you present things to the building department and you're discussing things that are more open to interpretation, like the things Marina was talking about with the rooftop, or something even less aggressive? I mean, when you come in, do they know, okay, we can trust these guys, they're not going to do something totally weird, or they have, everyone's interests in their hearts?
That is, the most important part of the project and process, and really the foundation for the company. And it takes time to gain that trust, and it takes a lot of effort and consistently going to the city and showing them as many accurate diagrams and documents as possible to back up what we are presenting. Because, at the end of the day, even if the city approves something, if something was done incorrectly, there is no statute of limitation on when something can be required to be revised. Mm-hmm. So it's in everybody's best interest to go in and present the necessary information. And just because there's so many projects on a day-to-day basis, you just need to really focus on presenting that accurate information. And so that way, when we go to the city, that people know our staff, and also behind the scenes, us making sure that the architects and engineers and everyone understands that that's a part of the process as well, and how important that is.
So it seems to me that the Expediter is probably the most useful and efficient in the specific locality in which he or her practices, right? Mm-hmm. It wouldn't make sense for an Expediter to do projects in another city if they don't know the rules and that particular location really, really well, right?
So that's exactly how our company is structured, right? We have a Malibu team, a Santa Monica team, LA Hillside residential team, an LA commercial and multifamily team. Beverly Hills has their residential versus commercial teams. So you're absolutely right. You need to, and what I said earlier, the longer you're doing this, the more valuable you are, purely based on experience. Mm-hmm. Because you can read the code as many times as you like, but until you've seen these variables on multiple occasions, there's no real way to understand it. Now, that being said, we also feel like we have designed a process that is very much a very systematic approach to how you get building permits achieved and how you do code consulting, which is why we have opened in different jurisdictions. We're actually now doing projects outside of the state. And so really? The reason for that is we were approached by a couple of different, we've been approached for many projects kind of all over the country to get involved with. And we finally felt like we had the right teams in place, and the company has grown to a level where we feel that we can expand out further. And even though we're not going to have all of the variable information at hand, the way we approach a project, which is this very, comprehensive team approach, and really, investigating what needs to be done on a project, we are actually looking to continue our expansion outside of this market. And, it also goes to state that we started with single family residential, but now we're working on commercial multifamily. Mm-hmm. So it's because we set up a process, but absolutely you're not the best at that until you have experience there. So, just like, it's funny, young architects are always, I always find it so wonderful when a young firm gets an opportunity. And I think that all the architects listening to this can resonate with that, okay, how do you get that opportunity if you've never done it before? But how do you actually become an established architect if you don't get that first chance, right? So there's always that first chance to go and do a new project and get that opportunity to, see what you can do and utilize your foundational skill set and who you are and how you approach things to be able to achieve what you want. But then, you're going to get better every time you do another one in that realm. So it's very similar with, the way I always try to approach it with architects and our firm of, we haven't done that before. I think we understand what it's going to take to make it happen. Mm-hmm. So if you believe that we're going to be the best for you and you're going to trust us with that process, we're going to do everything necessary to try and deliver on it. And there will be complexities, there will be obstacles, but you got to get that first chance.
Going back to the process, so let's say with our hypothetical project, we now have a building permit, right? Do you guys stay on board the project at all, or come back in after permitting is approved?
Well, there's two things. One, there's going to typically be small revisions and changes mm-hmm. that the design team contractor is going to need during the process. So we come in and, we're able to make those adjustments happen. On a very limited amount of projects, we stay involved just because there's maybe a personal connection with the person building, or it's actually a project that we're building ourselves, where we're staying involved in helping through the construction process.
In terms of cost of an expediter, I mean, I think, architects are familiar with architecture fee structures, percentage of construction, fixed fee, and things like that. If people are looking into hiring an expediter, what is the range of hiring a professional like that?
Okay, so the way we break it down is there's two parts of the process. There's one, which is the due diligence process, which we control most of those variables, mm-hmm. right? So we're able to set that at a fixed fee to prepare this due diligence analysis, which is anywhere from, $5,000 to $20,000 okay. to get that put together. And then there's the actual expediting of the project. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be very dependent on the design team, the client, the engineers, how, as you said, ambitious the project is there discretionary or just by right? And so on that phase of the project, we don't control all of those variables. So we come up with an estimate, mm-hmm. but we work similar to a law firm, and that we're charging an hourly fee structure for that component of the project.
Gotcha.
And then what services do you guys provide? I know you listed maybe all of them already, but it sounds like maybe in some cases you guys are hired to do, the whole thing. In other cases, maybe someone picks you just to do code review versus the due diligence portion versus something else.
Well, the most of our projects, it's this foundational aspect of give you all the regulations, guide you through the process. But because we've worked with so many firms and seen so many different kinds of projects, we've gained a reputation of being able to help assemble teams. And so I have a lot of opinions on great architects and engineers and project managers that I think will make a project go in the right direction. Because, we're trying to understand what our clients' desires are. And so by doing that and by knowing, so many different great architects from around, just in my office, I'm staring at the books, that have been given to me from, Scott Mitchell and Paul McLean and William Hefner and Olson Kundig that are just sitting right here, Landry and Peter Marina. It's all these, Richard Meyer, it's just all these incredible, that also can't forget the Back and Gillen book. They're also a great firm. So seeing all these different design styles and how people approach a project, I think that we really have tried to become a positive part of the process where, as you said earlier, it's a long process to go through it, to really, take an entire project from conceptual analysis through construction. And it's beneficial to everybody involved, including the land use consultant expediter, if everyone's having a good time. So, we try and put teams together that I think are going to resonate with one another. And so that's something that I've become personally very passionate about, is helping assemble these teams to put the right group of players together to create, this championship caliber group.
So Does typically the architect is the one bringing you guys on board, therefore?
No, it's really all of the above. So in a lot of times, the real estate agents in the community are bringing us on board at the very beginning. Sometimes it's someone's picked a contractor. Maybe we've been referred through someone's friend. So it's the engineers. It goes on and on. The foundational relationship for us, though, in the person and team that we're the most interconnected with is absolutely the architect. That's really, who we try and align ourselves with most of the communication on a project. Yeah. So we are brought in by the architects most often, but even when we're not, that's who we then end up being the most connected to in the process.
Is there an ideal client or project for an Expediter, or for you guys particularly?
So I think everybody may have their own opinion on what that is. For me personally, I'm so passionate about trend-setting architecture. I've been doing some development projects ourselves that, we like to think are not your standard development projects that are actually something that's unique and going to be iconic and seen as something that's going to be seen as important architecturally for the community and whoever lives there for many, many years. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for projects that I want to step in and be really personally involved with, that are trying to do something that is new. It makes just logical sense of how they're approaching the process. I don't think that it's always all about the massing of a property. And we're actually seeing this more and more often, because it's not so much developers that are out there right now. It's mostly end users creating this forever estate for themselves that they foresee themselves living in for many years and many generations potentially. And so finding someone that has passion for creating something that is meaningful, and that is for me, the projects I'm finding the most satisfying right now have a very organic nature to them and are bringing in this wellness luxury approach where, the ultimate luxury for all of our lives is our health and wellness, right? And so you're now seeing many projects that are taking advantage of bringing in, really old vegetation, maybe leaving some of these grand trees that are on a site and building around them. I can think of a number of projects that we're working on right now where a existing oak tree or sycamore is really the centerpiece of a site. And so finding something that, we can work with a brilliant architect with that has, the budget to achieve something that's really remarkable and, something we can all be proud of, because we work on so many projects. And, look, there are certain projects that if I was the owner or developer, I probably would not have done them the same way. But that's not for me to always decide. So projects where we get a seat at the table to help with some of those decisions, which as, we become more established and more longevity in our career, get to have that seat at the table to guide these projects. And that's something that is really passion and something I find a lot of gratitude and satisfaction in being a part of.
That's really great to hear. We were talking to a real estate agent in Los Angeles not long ago, and he was, of course, the land value of a property is very important, and a lot of people are thinking about that. Developers, obviously, and even homeowners. And there is currently, and it has been in the past for sure, this focus on solely just the numbers by maximizing square footage. And this particular real estate agent was saying, he's always trying to advise his clients, don't use that as your only metric, because you can really screw up the site and how it fuels the property.
So we've gone through a really interesting period here in the last decade. And it was, luck is when preparation meets opportunity, right? So about a decade ago was when the market started changing, the code started changing, and people started in the engineering technologies of what you could build became different. And so I think we started seeing this new revolution in modern large housing really only in the last decade for the most part. And at the beginning, it was a purely numbers game of price per square foot, right? And people are now starting to see that that's, and it takes practice, and it takes trying to really understand what it is that is the most important. So there were a lot of projects that were some very successful that just built, and they built a large set of square footage, and we're happy that we were able to help someone achieve that. But now what we're really seeing people resonate back to is a project that is within a human scale. You can't even, in some of these projects, you can't get to every room. It's not efficient, and it's not a beautiful lifestyle when you're there. And I think that what you've seen over the last 3 to 5 years of the most successful projects, and I think the most successful projects that are on the books right now or under construction, is something that when you walk into the home, it creates a emotional connection, right? And you're not just looking at this as the square footage. You're looking at, what is this home doing for me and to me and my family and my friends for, inspiration? What am I finding here that's enhancing my life? And so you're seeing that be more a focus on so many of these projects that are now occurring, because they've seen that many of the most successful projects financially have not been the biggest max square foot. It's been the most quality. And I think that that's a beautiful and important aspect of what's improving in the industry. And, I tell people all the time, I live in a dream house for me, which is a original mid-century from 69 from a case study architect. And it's got remarkable, mature landscaping that's been there for, 50 plus years. And it creates this sense of, it gives an energy and a soul where the property feels like it has, a bit of breath to it. Whereas you can go into some of these mega estates, and some people might like them, and certainly we're here to help if that's what you need to achieve. But there's something lacking in terms of its soul and character and feeling grounded. And I think the most successful current projects have been, those that, and in fact, so, I was the developer and built a house called the Stanley House. And, we had a wonderful group of design team with Austin Kelly from X10, who, unfortunately passed way too soon, and Lenny Kravitz for interior design, and, Vantage and Ignacio Rodriguez were also part of that project. And it was a brilliant team that came in and built this home that when you walked in, it didn't really feel like it was brand new. It was brand new, but it was so mature with the landscape and so textural with its touch and feel and textures, and old furniture that was actually, restored. It created a energy and vibe when people came there that resonated with them. And then it really set a tone for what people are trying to achieve with great architecture now going forward, of something where you walk in and it's not just the space, it's how you feel in that space.
That's super well said. That's something that I think even for sure a lot of architects talk about with their own work and what they try to achieve, is that feeling, that emotional aspect. And it's almost, it's difficult to describe sometimes, or to convey to people who might not have felt it before, of what the power of what that is and what that means, and how that is really, that is the value if you can get it. But it's difficult, it's not easy to achieve on many levels for sure.
Something that I think is, again, we become better at our job with more experience and more data, but we also become better from trying these different aspects of the industry where, I used to think, all right, here's your permit. Now just go build exactly what's there. But really by seeing and, signing the checks for all this construction and understanding what people are resonating towards, and talking to the agents, speaking to these architects, speaking to homeowners that have very important estates around the globe, being able to kind of not just offer one service, but be able to kind of guide an entire project team together, that I think is becoming what our firm is trying to achieve and make kind of our foundational effort, which is to create just this overall project team that can be the most successful together.
Interesting.
What do you think is the most common issue that you guys come across on projects? Is there one in particular that just kind of always shows up?
I think it's the small things that can get lost in the mix.
Yeah.
And that is why, it's important to have checklists and balance, structures to be there and make sure that you hit all these things, because you can forget a mailing notice that is going to restrict you from starting your project because it was forgotten to send out, or, the length that it takes to go through the low impact development for water mitigation on site, right? It just takes a long time. And if you forget this up front, it can certainly drag out the process. I don't know if there's any one thing in particular, but it's so difficult. We're all so busy. The entire industry is so busy. And it's there is a quote that, if you want to get something done, ask a busy person, because they're actually out there getting things done. But within that, you are going to miss things, and that does happen. It's something that we stress out on every day. And I think that just trying to take a moment to make sure that you've covered everything on a project and take that step back from the big picture and start focusing in on the little things is what we forget sometimes, and where I think all of us in the industry need to find that time, find that dedication to make sure the details are there, because that's really the foundation for everything, is within the details.
A somewhat similar question, more about expediters in general, is do you have a sense of what some of the common misconceptions are about what you do or what expediters do?
Well, I think you started off by saying that, what does an expediter do to circumvent the process? Right. People come to us and say, well, we hired you because we thought it would, you could open up a door faster. And, the real answer of how you speed things up in today's world is just by doing everything that's required. That's the only way to make it work.
Yeah.
So I think that's the misconception. There's not just some secret way of getting things approved faster. So it is a real wake-up call for people that just aren't used to the LA or, our area's bureaucracy. Yeah. Where, but the thing is, I find rules and regulations to set a good foundation. I think that rules are super important. I mean, I've based our whole company around understanding rules, and not every city and not every country operates in the same way. And so it is definitely a difficult process for people that do projects in other parts of the world or even other parts of our country to understand why it is taking so long. Yeah. And, there is the structure that's in place from these different cities. I mean, you even just look at a small city like Malibu and all of the different departments that they have there. And, Malibu is seen as the most difficult place to achieve permits in our Southern California area. And it is, but it's not because there's specific restrictions that don't allow you to do what's within their code. It's they just have so many different departments that you have to go through and different processes to go through to achieve the ability to get approval for that process. Whereas, somewhere else may just have one plan checker and one department that does everything. And so people don't understand that all these different processes are in place. So It's interesting.
Yeah. We find that that's the perception, especially if people come from a different industry and they found a way in their industry to kind of hack the system, so to speak. And they think they can also find a way to hack the building code or the building permitting approval process system. And, that's not,
I think they're just hackers. They try to hack everywhere they can, right?
Maybe. So talking about Crest Real Estate itself, actually, it's interesting that the name of the company is Crest Real Estate. So do you guys develop your own projects?
So the name Crest Real Estate, and the reason it's just all things real estate. And if it's happening in the real estate area, we want to be involved and we want to be able to provide some sort of service to assist. And so instead of it being named, my name and associates or something like that, I wanted to create something where everybody within the company was able to represent, what kind of the company overall stands for and what our philosophies are, so that when people go and, have our Crest branded logo on, which I do think is pretty sharp, people have some sense, okay, this is the way this person is going to be treating my project, and here's the way they go through that process. So it is all things real estate, but certainly the foundation of all of it is understanding the code. And the development projects are just, that really came out of, again, I use the word passion a lot, of wanting to try and, we are not at the end of the day, even though we present a lot of direction to teams, I'm not making that final decision. That is really up to the owner and up to whoever is in charge of the project. So we felt it would be a great opportunity to do projects where we were that final decision maker. And it's fun, it's gratifying, and ideally financially successful as well. But we're really doing it more as our expression of what we've learned and gathered from the industry to try and create, some meaningful and unique projects, and also see value in properties that, maybe someone else didn't, because of that different levels of understanding we have. And it's the same skill set that we use to guide our clients. So whether we're doing it, they're doing it, anyone's doing it, it's always about just providing that exact same information, and just providing everybody the same level of service. That's how we're able to work with, people that live next door to one another, competing real estate agents, whatever it may be. We want to be there and be everybody's first call on a real estate project. And I think we've done a really great job in making that, what people feel. I think that there is a great sense of pride that we have in that when someone's looking at a real estate project, we're referred by many people. So when we get a call, people will say, I think there were 3 or 4 people that told me to call you when I called them about my project. And that to me is the ultimate in terms of, reputation, because we don't really market. This is kind of my first type of, real deep dive into an interview like this. And it's because we try and come with initial credibility from others. And so, that's really what we try and achieve. And it goes back to why we're trying to do different things to expand our understanding and expand what we can offer.
So from that, what is the future of Crest? I mean, are you starting to get the sense that maybe a few years from now or whatever period of time, you might evolve and grow into doing many other things, still related to real estate and architecture and developing and all of that stuff. But do you have a sense of trajectory of like what you want to achieve, or is it first hire more people?
Well, I think that your human capital is always the foundation for what you can do going forward, right? I can work as much as I do and well known for sending emails at 2 a.m. and having a meeting at 8. So there is no shortcut to doing a lot. It's just hard work and putting the time in. But we need more great qualified people. And it's not like there's a lot of firms out there that do what we do where we could, grow based on that. It really, you grow based on experience. So that's kind of the restricting factor in how big we can get in the short term. But in the long term, we definitely anticipate going into many other markets. We'd like to be a company that is represented all over. And it's based on our philosophies of how we approach a project. And that's really what I think we should bring to different markets that we're told don't really have this same type of service. Now, me personally, I am as, caring and loving of the city of Los Angeles and this general area as anyone out there, being raised here, UCLA, living, working, all of it. So I'll be focusing my efforts predominantly on continuing to expand within this incredible opportunity market that we have in LA and Beverly Hills and through to the ocean. But I think the overall objective is really to spread this philosophy anywhere we can. And I think that it is something that we want to see grow and continue to evolve.
I want to spend a couple minutes talking about your own journey, because I think, we've covered the technical and the specifics of the permitting and the and expediting and all that stuff. But clearly, where you guys have gotten to what you have achieved, it comes from you. And it's funny to think that, in the beginning, you were talking about your story of meeting your neighbor in his garage for that interview, and then zooming forward. So when you started Crest, did you have a sense of trajectory at that time, or was it day by day things were unfolding?
There's always a combination of long-term vision and ambition, along with being in the trenches. So, when the company started, there was already a lot of clientele. So we had a great foundation for starting a successful company where there were clients that wanted to be here, wanted to give myself and my limited staff their trust in us taking their project forward. And so we knew that it would grow. I always want the next, thing to continue to proceed and get better and more success, which comes from surrounding yourself with people that are going to deliver at the high standard that we expect. So it's a long-term vision of just surrounding ourselves with incredible people. And I think that's by far the most important thing about the philosophy of our company is the people that are here. We call ourselves the Crest family, and we have a real love and family atmosphere that we try and support one another within, whether that be professionally or personally. So we want to continue, bringing people in to extend that family. And I think that the more people we have here that can do that, the more that we can grow.
I think it's interesting. I mean, in my view, there are certain people who are good at their particular task or their job, whatever that might be, but that's not necessarily the same thing as a person who is good at leading a group of people and a person that's good at training other people or growing into a 25, 30, et cetera, size operation. So I guess this is more of a personality kind of question. Like, do you have a sense of how or why why you're capable and have been able to basically lead this endeavor? Because I don't think it's a common skill for everybody. I think some people are good, let's say, at painting, but being good at painting doesn't mean you can teach others or create a business around it.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I try to take enormous pride in a level of responsibility in, is making sure that I'm leading by example and doing the hardest work and being as diligent as possible, and setting also expectations on people that gives them responsibility right off the bat. And I think all of this comes from, of course, parents that were extremely supportive of me and my education as I was growing up, but also from my mentor and going in and seeing how he was able to lead meetings and to take a group of of leaders from different companies together and have one person sitting at that table that's really directing. And I think I don't know if that's a learned skill set or an innate skill set, but it's something that I certainly feel is one of my most important characteristics, is the ability to sit within a group and have everyone feel that there is a level of authority that they have and a level of, responsibility that each person that's there should be sharing within the project, but at the same time, making sure that there's, a procedural level of how we're getting through figuring out very complex issues. And so I think that creating that leadership is something that's learned and really created through experience of doing it. And I was very fortunate that at a super young age, I was able to sit in and lead people much older than me. They still all mostly are. It's not as much anymore, but it's for the most part there. But I give an incredible amount of credit to, the mentors in my life, and also taking examples from sports and competition, because I think that, sports and competition, and especially, playing football and baseball and lacrosse my whole life, showed that you're only as strong as the rest of the people on your team. And yes, there are certain people on that team that are, carrying a heavier load than others, but it's all completely interconnected to be able to achieve the greatest level of success. And so, with that, I try and bring on people that want to be leaders. And just like myself, I've had a program where I bring on almost like proteges. And you saw Lucas, who's the current gentleman that's working with me, who was driving us around. We were seeing all these properties the other day. And, he didn't have a lot of experience beforehand, but he's in every single meeting. And, and it's ladies and gentlemen that are young and are ambitious that I've taken in that role, which is how I learned and how I try and give back, is by having this series of people in this program that's become, pretty well established. And I've got some of the most powerful clients in the world that have asked me to take on their son or daughter to work alongside. And I think that that's probably the highest level of respect and appreciation that I've ever felt, was when someone's asked me to mentor and teach, their kin, especially someone that has access to any number of opportunities out there because of the, success and power of that family, to be able to feel like we're able to provide this leadership mentoring that I think is so important. And I think that's what Crest really stands for, is that it's a group of all leaders that feel like we're a team that supports one another. And that's why I think we can continue to expand into the future.
That's fantastic.
One last question for me. It seems like, part of your job is probably taking like the most stress of projects, right? Like the whole, zoning, permitting, like all of this stuff. Like there is a tremendous amount of pressure in the accuracy and coaching that you guys provide. What do you do on your downtime to kind of like chill, relax, and just not think about this stuff, if you have any downtime?
No, it's so great, because I do think about that often, that we're in this really high pressure role that has so much at stake. And there's a lot of people doing very expensive work with an extreme amount of financial, and sometimes, families that want to get into their home, or, a big housing project, or whatever it may be, a restaurant that wants to open. And so there's a lot of pressure, absolutely, because, we're kind of that gateway to starting your project with getting the building permits. So I guess the way that I internalize stress is by working, which may or may not make sense, but to actually just get things done is really the only way that I've ever found effective at alleviating the amount of stress. So I think that I do work too much. It's a double-edged sword, right? It's one thing that's allowed us to be very successful, but it's also something that I would love in my personal life to have more ability to explore, but I do love what we do. And for my personal escape, I work out quite a lot. I have a trainer that comes in and supports me and gets these workouts in. And, I realized a bit ago when I was about to cancel these, a session, and I said, you know what? Because I had a client that really needed me to go on a project. And, I was already working probably, 16 hours a day before on a number of projects. And I realized, your most important client is sometimes yourself.
Yeah.
And so you have to take care of that as a priority. I still love to play football. I like to race and do many things with friends and family. Anything that can kind of get the adrenaline and the competitive nature out there is something that I feel alleviates stress and can really also help me feel like I'm being the optimal version of myself, because that's what it's all about. It's being, getting the most out of this journey that we're on. And that doesn't just mean financially. And I don't plan on doing this forever. There's a lot of things that I'd like to try and work on. And that's why we work so hard, is to set up the foundation for this company to thrive and succeed on its own, with potentially, less than staying up till 2 a.m., 3 to 4 nights a week, working on many different assignments. And so, and actually, here's one thing that keeps me happy.
Oh, cute.
He's here too. So this is the most important employee in the company.
So cute.
So yeah, having a dog is certainly a key component to health and happiness, I think. But I think that it's really about just trying to do the best at everything you go after, and keeping what my mantra is, which is relentless positivity. Because people can say that they're positive, but there's a lot of difficult issues that come up on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis. And it's about immediately seeing, sometimes at your detriment, but really seeing what is the objective to solve that problem. And it's not always a problem. Sometimes maybe it's a benefit. It's something, it's a happy moment, and really just being so excited and appreciative and taking nothing for granted and working on everything at the highest level of excellence that you can.
That's really great. This has been really wonderful. I'm very excited to see your guys' future and how you guys evolve and grow, which I'm sure is going to happen, and you're going to have a lot of success. Thank you so much for being on the show. I know this is kind of the first interview you've done in a certain sense, and I think this was really fantastic.
Thank you both so much. I mean, I really appreciate what you're trying to get out there, and, your clear passion for architecture, and really making through that the world a better place, and exploring, people from the inside out. Thanks
for listening to this week's episode, the holiday special episode with our holiday guest, Jason Sommers. Thanks to Jason for coming on the show. If you like what we're doing, then please support us by leaving a review in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find us on Spotify. Subscribe there. You can find us on YouTube. Subscribe, like, follow, comment, etc. on YouTube.
We are also on most of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also text or leave a voicemail on the hotline. It's 213-222-6950. And what else? That's a wrap. It's almost the end of 2021.
This will be 2022?
The next one?
I don't know.
Not quite.
And stay tuned for further details on the open position to work for the Second Studio.
Oh, you want
to be an audio and video editor of the Second Studio. A very prestigious position, a very important one.
We pay with burgers.
We pay with burgers? In-N-Out. We pay with In-N-Out.
You have to like burgers. Otherwise, it might not work out.
One burger per 5 minutes of editing. Imagine that.
No. Oh, God. No, that sounds unhealthy.
And very greasy. for a payment. Is this the last episode before the end of the year?
Oh my goodness, I think it is.
I think
no, it's not.
It's not.
No,
You
it's
gotta know
not.
that. Okay.
Haha,
The
I tricked you
penultimate.
right there.
The penultimate.
Another
recording.
proof that you don't know what date we are.
No, I don't. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again once more before the end of the year. Bye.
Bye bye.